There's a certain rhythm to life that lulls you into a false sense of security. Wake up, work, come home, eat, sleep, repeat. The little things blur together until you stop questioning them. You stop looking. You assume that if something was wrong, you'd just know. I wasn't looking. Not at first. The first time I noticed the delivery guy, it was barely a blip on my radar. I had come home for lunch unexpectedly, something I didn't do often. Work had been slow, so I figured I'd take the extra time to surprise Claire. I pulled into the driveway and saw him walking down our front steps, a branded catering bag slung over his shoulder. He wasn't some scrawny kid dropping off fast food. He was in his mid-30s, muscular, well-groomed. His uniform looked too crisp for someone who just carried food. I barely gave it a second thought at the time. Maybe Claire ordered lunch. Maybe a friend had sent something over. Then I stepped inside, and there was no food on the counter. No takeout bags. No lingering scent of a meal. Claire was in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone, acting as if no one had just been here. "You eat already?" I asked. She looked up, smiling. "What?" I gestured toward the door. "The delivery guy. What did you get?" Her smile faltered for the briefest second before she covered it up. "Oh, just a salad. Nothing special. I already ate." It was a small lie, a stupid one, and I let it slide. The second time, I saw the delivery man handing Claire a neatly packed container at the door. She was smiling, laughing. Her fingers brushed his when she took the bag. It wasn't a flirty giggle, not outright, but something about the way she looked at him put a bad taste in my mouth. And we hadn't ordered anything that day. I slowed my truck as I pulled up, watching the way her posture shifted when she realized I was home. A little too quick to step back, a little too eager to put space between them. "Hey, babe," she greeted me, her voice casual, too casual. The caterer turned, giving me a single nod before heading back to his van. No smile, no pleasantries. Like I was just another inconvenience to be dealt with. I leaned against my truck, watching him pull away. Something was wrong. I just didn't know what yet. By the third time, I stopped making excuses. I came home early again, but this time, I didn't park in the driveway. I left my truck down the street and walked up quietly. The van was already there, but he wasn't at the door. He was inside. The front door was unlocked. My wife had let him in. I stepped inside, my heartbeat steady but heavy. The air smelled rich, thick with the aroma of something expensive, one of those fancy catered dishes. A meal meant for two. Footsteps. A soft laugh. Hers. I moved through my own house like a stranger, like an intruder. I heard them before I saw the muffled words. An easy exchange. I followed the sound, gripping the edge of the doorway as I stepped into the kitchen. There they were. Claire stood by the counter, too close to him. The caterer had one hand planted on the marble surface, leaning in just slightly. Not touching, not yet, but close. Close enough. She was smiling. Not the way she smiled at me. I stood there for a second, letting it sink in, letting the weight of it settle. Then I spoke. "Having a nice lunch?" She jerked back like I'd shot a gun in the air. Her eyes widened, mouth opening slightly before she forced a laugh. "Oh, you're home early." She moved fast, stepping away from him like that made a difference. Like that erased what I had just seen. The caterer straightened, glancing at me. He wasn't afraid. He should have been. I took a slow step forward. Didn't realize we had company. Claire was quick with the excuses. He brought some samples. From that new place I was telling you about." I glanced at the counter. A plated dish sat there, still steaming, as if they just sat down to eat. 2 forks. 2 glasses of wine. I turned my gaze to him. "Get out." The word was calm, quiet. Dangerous. He hesitated, just for a second. Just long enough for me to wonder if he was going to make this harder than it needed to be. But then he grabbed his things and left. Claire exhaled sharply, rubbing her arms like she was cold. "Babe, you're overreacting." I wasn't listening. I turned to look at her, really look at her, and for the first time, I felt nothing but hatred. I stood there for a long moment, just watching her. Claire had always been a good liar, but right now, she was scrambling. I could see it in the way she kept adjusting her posture, shifting her weight, trying to find the right way to play this off. "Babe, you're overreacting," she said, forcing a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's not what it looks like." I didn't move, didn't blink, just let the silence stretch between us, thick and suffocating. Not what it looked like. That was the classic defense, wasn't it? Like I hadn't just walked into my own house and found another man getting comfortable in my kitchen, in my space with my wife. Like she hadn't been standing too close, hadn't been smiling at him the way she used to smile at me. I let my gaze drift to the counter. The 2 glasses of wine, the still steaming food, the evidence of whatever cozy little moment I'd interrupted. I clenched my jaw, swallowing down the rage bubbling in my chest. "Go ahead, then," I said, my voice low. "Tell me what it is." Claire hesitated. For all her quick thinking, she hadn't expected to be cornered like this. Her eyes darted to the door where the caterer had left, then back to me, calculating. "I told you, it's just a catering sample," she said finally, smoothing her hands down her shirt like that would somehow make this better. "I thought it would be a nice surprise. You know how I want to throw that dinner party for your promotion? I was just testing out some options." She had the nerve to smile, like that was supposed to be reassuring. I let out a breath, slow and controlled, forcing my hands to stay at my sides. "So you needed 2 glasses of wine for a sample?" Claire blinked, barely missing a beat. "Well, I figured I'd sit down and enjoy it instead of just taking a bite and tossing it." "What's the big deal?" "The big deal," I said evenly, "is that this is the 3rd time I've seen him here when we haven't ordered anything." That wiped the fake smile off her face. For a second, she didn't have an answer. She shifted her weight again, arms crossing over her chest. "Defensive. Okay," she admitted, rolling her eyes. "Fine. I've been testing out different catering services. I wanted to surprise you." I exhaled through my nose, forcing myself to stay still, to stay quiet. She was good, I'd give her that. She knew how to make a lie sound reasonable, how to weave just enough truth into it to make me doubt myself. If I hadn't already seen the way she looked at him, I might have believed her. But I wasn't stupid. "You expect me to believe you invited some random caterer into our house to test a meal with him?" Her lips parted like she was going to argue, but I wasn't finished. "You expect me to believe that he just happened to be here every time I came home early? That it's just a coincidence?" Her jaw tightened. "You're making a huge deal out of nothing." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "Then why do you look guilty?" She flinched. It was subtle, but I caught it. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not because she was scared of me, but because she knew that I had caught her in something she couldn't easily explain away. She wet her lips, grasping for another angle. "Look, I get that this seems weird, but I swear." "Swear on what?" I cut in. "On our marriage? On your vows? On the fact that you've been seeing the same guy behind my back and just happen to have an excuse for it every time I ask." Claire's face twisted, anger flashing behind her eyes now. "Oh, so now I'm cheating? That's what you think?" I stared at her, my pulse pounding in my ears. "I know what I saw." She scoffed, throwing up her hands. "God, you're being ridiculous." Ridiculous. That was her angle now, like I was some paranoid fool making things up in my head. "Claire," I said slowly, gripping the edge of the counter, so I didn't put my fist through it instead. "I come home early 3 times. 3 times. And every single time, that guy is here when we haven't ordered anything." I gestured toward the plates. Sitting down at my table, drinking wine, making himself comfortable in my house. She swallowed hard, but I could see the defiance in her eyes, the way she was digging her heels in. "And you still want me to believe it's just business?" Her jaw clenched, and for a split second, I thought she was going to finally break, finally admit it. But she didn't. Instead, she doubled down. "Yes, that's exactly what I want you to believe. Because it is just business." I exhaled slowly, letting my hands drop from the counter. She wasn't going to admit it. Not yet. But I'd already seen everything I needed to see. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, heading for the front door. "Where are you going?" she called after me, her voice sharper now, more frantic. I didn't answer. I just grabbed my keys and stepped outside, slamming the door behind me. Because if I stayed, if I listened to one more of her lies, I wasn't sure I could keep my anger in check. And I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. I didn't drive away. Not at first. I stood on the porch, gripping my truck keys so tightly that the ridges dug into my palm. My breathing was slow, controlled, but beneath it was a storm I wasn't sure I could hold back much longer. Claire was lying to me. That much was clear. The problem was, she was good at it. She always had been. Even before this, before him, she had a way of twisting things just enough to make you doubt yourself. Just enough to make you question whether you were the one overreacting. I'd seen her do it to other people. I never thought she'd do it to me. A movement inside caught my eye. Through the kitchen window, I saw Claire standing there, hands braced on the counter, staring down at the untouched plate of food. Her body was tense, her expression unreadable. For a brief second, I wondered if she felt guilty. Then she turned, grabbed the wine glasses, and poured them both down the sink, like she was erasing the evidence. I exhaled sharply, shoving my keys into my pocket. I had two options: get in my truck and drive off to cool down, or walk back in there and force the truth out of her. I wasn't in the mood for driving. I yanked the door open and stepped back inside. Claire spun around, eyes widening. Oh, that was quick. I ignored the forced casualness in her voice. We're not done talking. She sighed, rubbing her temple. Jake, please. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Am I? I took a step closer, watching her closely. You sure about that? She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Tell me something, Claire. If this is just business like you said, why do you look like a deer in headlights every time I walk in on it? Her lips parted, but no words came out. She was scrambling again, searching for the right answer, the right lie. I didn't give her time. I've been married to you long enough to know when you're hiding something. I continued, my voice steady but sharp. And I know when you're guilty. Claire straightened, her expression hardening. I'm not guilty of anything. I barked out a humorless laugh. Yeah? Then why the hell does that guy waltz in here like he belongs? Why do I keep finding you two together when I'm not supposed to be home? Jake, she said, her tone taking on that exasperated edge like I was the unreasonable one. I told you, I was just trying out different catering options for the party. Cut the crap, Claire. Silence. Her face twitched, just barely, but I caught it. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed, crossing her arms. You're being paranoid. The way she said it, calm, dismissive, made something inside me snap. Paranoid, I repeated, taking another step forward. Claire, do you think I'm blind? Do you think I'm stupid? Of course not, she said quickly. But there was an edge of nervousness in her voice now. Then stop lying to me. She flinched at that. A real one this time. For the first time since I caught them together, she looked uncertain, like she wasn't sure which version of her lie to stick to anymore. I kept pushing. Who is he to you? Her lips pressed into a thin line. Don't tell me he's just a caterer, I said. Not when I saw the way he looked at you. The way you looked at him. Jake. I slammed my fist against the counter, making her jump. Tell me the truth. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. It's not what you think. I let out a slow, bitter laugh. Then what the hell is it? She hesitated. Again, but this time she looked down. Not at me, not at the counter, but at her own hands, where she was twisting her wedding ring around her finger. And that told me everything. I took a step back, running a hand over my face. Jesus Christ. Jake, please. I shook my head, letting out a harsh breath. So what? You're just going to keep lying to my face? Keep gaslighting me until I start second-guessing myself. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She knew she had pushed too far. She knew I wasn't buying it anymore. You do this, I said, my voice quiet but lethal. You lie. You make up just enough of a story to keep me from digging too deep. And then when I do start asking questions, you act like I'm crazy for thinking something's wrong. She swallowed hard. But I'm not crazy, I said, my voice turning cold. And you're a terrible liar when you're under pressure. Silence. Then, finally, she broke. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Fine. I know him. I felt something ugly twist in my gut. I nodded slowly, stepping back. Yeah, I figured as much. But it's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. She hesitated, then sighed, rubbing her forehead. His name is Evan. We met at a charity event a few months ago. He owns the catering company. He's just been helping me plan the party, that's all. I stared at her. That wasn't all. Not even close. Helping you plan the party, I echoed. By showing up unannounced when I'm not home? By getting comfortable in my kitchen. Claire's gaze dropped again. She wasn't denying it anymore. I let out a slow breath, my whole body humming with rage. I want the truth, Claire. All of it. Right now. She opened her mouth, probably to lie again, but I wasn't giving her another chance. I turned, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" she called after me. Her voice edged with something close to panic. I didn't even look back. "To find out what you won't tell me." I didn't drive aimlessly. I had a destination. The name Evan burned in my head like a brand. It gave shape to the suspicion that had been eating at me. Now, I had something real, something concrete. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for Claire to feed me another excuse. I was going to him. I found the catering company's address online in under a minute. Their website was polished, high-end, full of glossy photos of plated dishes and smiling staff. The kind of service Claire would love, refined, expensive, and designed to impress people who didn't matter. I pulled up to the building 15 minutes later. It was a sleek little place, all glass and steel, a sign out front that read, Evan Carter Catering. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Then I got out. Inside, the air smelled like herbs and roasted meat. A receptionist sat behind a long counter, typing away at a computer. She barely glanced up when I walked in. "Can I help you?" "I need to see Evan Carter." She arched an eyebrow, looking me over. "Do you have an appointment?" "Tell him it's about Claire." That got her attention. Her fingers paused over the keyboard. She studied me for a second, then picked up the phone. A short conversation. Muffled words. A flicker of something in her expression. Surprise, maybe discomfort. Then she hung up. "You can go in," she said, nodding to her hallway. "Last office on the right." I didn't wait for her to change her mind. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps slow, deliberate. My heart pounded, but not from nerves. From rage. I reached the door. The name Evan Carter was printed on a plaque beside it. I didn't knock. I walked in. Evan sat behind a sleek black desk, a laptop open in front of him. He looked exactly how I remembered, stocky, well-groomed, just a little too polished for a guy who supposedly ran a kitchen. His eyes flicked up. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Jake," he said smoothly, leaning back in his chair. "Didn't expect you to drop by." I shut the door behind me. The sound was loud in the quiet office. "You should have." A slow smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He didn't say anything. I took a step forward. "You know why I'm here?" He tilted his head slightly, as if considering his answer. "I think I might." I exhaled through my nose, my fists clenched at my sides. "Then let's cut the bullshit. What's going on between you and Claire?" He didn't flinch, didn't shift uncomfortably. Instead, he laughed. It wasn't loud, just a soft, amused chuckle like I'd asked the stupidest question in the world. "Come on, man," he said, shaking his head. "You already know." That was it. That was the confirmation I needed. I lunged. I didn't think, I just moved. Before he could react, I grabbed the front of his shirt and yanked him up out of his chair. His smirk vanished as I shoved him against the desk, my grip tightening. "You think this is funny?" I growled. His hands came up, palms out. "Hey!" I slammed him back against the desk, hard enough that the laptop rattled. "How long?" I demanded, my voice low, dangerous. His jaw tensed. "Jake, how long?" Silence. Then, finally, he exhaled. "A few months. A few months." I let go of his shirt and took a step back. My whole body was trembling, not from fear, not from shock, but from the sheer force of holding myself back. A few months. While I had been coming home thinking my marriage was fine, Claire had been sneaking around with him. I stared at him, breathing hard. He straightened his shirt, watching me carefully, like he wasn't sure if I was about to take another swing. "You should leave," he said quietly. I let out a hollow laugh. "You really think I'm just going to walk away?" He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Look, man, I didn't go looking for this. It just happened." I laughed again, harsher this time. "It just happened." Like that was supposed to make it better. Like that was supposed to mean anything. I shook my head, disgust twisting in my gut. "You're a piece of shit, you know that." Evan didn't argue. He just looked at me, eyes unreadable. Then he said, "You're not going to forgive her, are you?" I froze. The way he said it, calm, matter of fact, made something cold settle in my chest. He wasn't asking because he cared. He was asking because he already knew the answer. I turned without another word and walked out. Claire was waiting when I got home. She must have seen my truck pull up because the second I stepped inside, she was there hovering by the kitchen like she had been pacing. "Where did you go?" she asked, her voice tense. I shut the door behind me, slow and deliberate. I talked to Evan. Her face drained of color. I watched her carefully, waiting for her reaction, waiting for her to deny it. She didn't. Instead, she swallowed hard and whispered, "I can explain." I stared at her for a long moment. Then I said, "No, you can't." Claire's face twisted like she wanted to argue, to fight back. But she didn't. Not right away. For once, she had nothing to say. I stepped further into the house, shutting the door behind me. The sound was heavy, final. She swallowed, her throat bobbing, her arms crossing over her chest. Defensive. Always defensive. "What did he tell you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I let out a humorless chuckle, shaking my head. Enough. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Jake, don't." I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. "Don't stand there and act like you didn't just spend months sneaking around behind my back." She flinched, but I didn't care. I walked into the kitchen, yanking open the fridge, grabbing a beer like I wasn't 2 seconds away from throwing something through a wall. Claire stood behind me, silent. I popped the cap off, took a long drink, then turned to look at her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even trying to. Instead, she looked tired, like she had been carrying the weight of this for too long and was finally letting it crush her. For a brief second, I wondered if she had wanted me to find out, if she had been waiting for me to put the pieces together so she wouldn't have to pretend anymore. I exhaled slowly, setting the bottle down on the counter. "How long, Claire?" She hesitated. How long?" I repeated, louder this time. She squeezed her eyes shut, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "A few months," she whispered. I laughed. "Short, bitter." "Yeah, that's what he said too." She sucked in a breath, her shoulders curling inward. "Jake, why?" I cut her off, my voice flat. She opened her mouth, closed it again, looked down at her hands like the answer was written in her palms. "I don't know," she admitted finally. I stared at her. "You don't know?" I repeated, disbelief coating every word. She ran a shaky hand through her hair. "It wasn't planned. It just happened." That again. That same excuse. I barked out a laugh, shaking my head. "Jesus, Claire, that's all you've got." She looked at me, then really looked at me. "What do you want me to say?" I took a step closer, my chest burning. "I want the truth." She exhaled sharply, tilting her head back, staring at the ceiling like she could find the right words there. Then she finally spoke. "It started at that gala back in October," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were supposed to come, but you had to work late." I clenched my jaw. I remember that night. She had been irritated when I told her I couldn't make it, but I hadn't thought much of it. And I pressed. "And we talked," she continued. "Nothing serious, just conversation. But then, I don't know, we kept running into each other. And one night, he invited me to a private tasting at his restaurant. And I went. I inhaled sharply, forcing my hands to stay at my sides. She shook her head quickly. "I wasn't planning on anything happening, Jake. I swear." But she cut herself off, letting out a humorless laugh. "But I liked the attention. I liked feeling wanted, something twisted in my gut. And I didn't make you feel wanted?" She flinched. "That's not what I meant." I let out a slow breath, my jaw aching from how hard I was grinding my teeth. "And then what?" I asked, my voice quieter now. She hesitated. "We kissed that night." I squeezed my eyes shut. "Of course you did." And then, she exhaled shakily. And then it just kept happening. I opened my eyes, staring at her. "Did you sleep with him?" Her breath hitched. She didn't answer. That was answer enough. I laughed again, shaking my head. "Jesus Christ, Claire." Tears finally filled her eyes, but I didn't care. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. "You never do," I muttered, grabbing my beer again and taking another long drink. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then Claire took a small step forward. "Jake, don't," I said immediately, my voice sharp. She stopped. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since I had met her, I felt nothing but disgust. Was it worth it? I asked, my voice empty. She sucked in a sharp breath, her chin trembling. Don't lie, I warned. She hesitated. Then, finally, she whispered no. Too bad, because there was no coming back from this. I grabbed my keys off the counter and turned toward the door. Where are you going? She asked quickly, panic creeping in her voice. I didn't look at her. I need air. She took a shaky breath. Jake, please. Can we talk about this? I let out a slow exhale, gripping the doorknob. Then I turned my head just enough to look at her over my shoulder. You had months to talk to me, I said coldly. You chose to lie instead. Then I walked out. And this time, I didn't look back. I didn't know where I was driving. I just kept going. The roads were empty this late at night. Nothing but streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than necessary, my knuckles stiff from the pressure. I could still hear Claire's voice in my head, that pathetic whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen. What a joke. People don't accidentally fall into bed together. They don't just happen to cheat for months. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. A series of them. And she had made every single one. I pulled into an empty parking lot behind some closed-down strip mall and killed the engine. The silence was deafening. I leaned back in my seat, rubbing a hand over my face, exhaling slowly. I should have been furious. And I was. But there was something else creeping in, something heavier. Finality. She had told me the truth. At least, the part of it I forced out of her. But it didn't change anything. It didn't erase the fact that she had looked me in the eyes, time and time again, and lied without hesitation. How many times had I kissed her goodnight while she was thinking about him? How many times had she smiled at me while she was sneaking around behind my back? I clenched my jaw, staring out at the dark sky. There was no fixing this. No talking it out. No working through it. It was over. I just had to decide how I wanted it to end. I got back to the house an hour later. The lights were still on. Claire was sitting on the couch, curled up with a blanket like she'd been waiting for me. Her head snapped up the second I walked in. Jake, she breathed, relief flashing across her face. Like I'd come back to forgive her. Like I could. I shut the door and leaned against it, crossing my arms. I'm not staying. Her expression crumpled. Wait, what? I shook my head, staring at her, at this woman I'd spent years of my life loving, trusting. And for what? You made your choice, I said flatly. Now I'm making mine. Her eyes filled with tears. Jake, please, don't do this. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm not the one who did this, Claire. You did, over and over again. And now you want me to just, what? Pretend it never happened. Her lip trembled. I don't want to lose you. Then maybe, I said, voice sharp, you shouldn't have thrown me away. She sucked in a breath, wiping at her face. It wasn't like that. I scoffed. It was exactly like that. She shook her head, desperate now. I still love you. I stared at her for a long moment, my chest tightening. Then I exhaled, slow and controlled, and said, I don't believe you. She let out a broken sound, part sob, part gasp. I didn't care. I turned toward the stairs, heading for the bedroom. She followed, her voice rising in panic. Where are you going? I didn't answer. I just walked into our room, grabbed a duffel bag from the closet, and started throwing my clothes into it. Claire stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. Please don't do this. I zipped the bag shut, slung it over my shoulder, and finally turned to face her. Give me one good reason to stay. She opened her mouth, closed it. She had nothing. I nodded. That's what I thought. I walked past her, down the stairs, toward the door. Jake, she choked out, her voice breaking. I stopped with my hand on the knob, staring at the wood grain, my pulse steady, my mind clear for the first time all night. Then I turned back to her one last time. You had months to think about what you wanted, I said. I hope he was worth it. I walked out, and I didn't look back. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. Not at Claire. Not at the life we had built together. Not at the years I had wasted believing in something that had been crumbling under my feet long before I noticed. The air outside was cold, sharp against my skin, but it felt cleaner than inside that house. Inside, everything was suffocating. Lies layered on top of more lies, thick enough to choke on. I threw my bag into the passenger seat of my truck and slid behind the wheel. For a moment, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, breathing. Then, without thinking, I reached for my phone. Not to call Claire. Not to hear her sob more excuses or beg me to stay. Instead, I scrolled down my contacts until I found the one person who might actually talk some sense into me. I hit call. It rang twice before he picked up. Jake, my brother, Ryan, sounded half asleep. What the hell, man? It's almost midnight. I exhaled through my nose. I need a place to crash. A pause. Then shit. Yeah. Another pause. Then I heard movement on the other end, followed by the sound of a door shutting. You at home? Just left. All right. Come over. Doors open. I didn't say thanks. I just ended the call, threw the truck into drive, and peeled out of the driveway. Claire had been standing in the doorway, watching me leave. I caught a glimpse of her in the mirror, arms wrapped around herself, tears streaming down her face. Too bad. She'd had months to care. Now it was too late. Ryan lived 20 minutes away in a small apartment downtown, a place I had never paid much attention to before. Now it was my escape. By the time I pulled into his lot, he was already outside, leaning against his car, arms crossed. He was still in sweatpants and an old hoodie, his dark hair a mess, but his expression was sharp, awake now. I barely had the truck in park before he was walking toward me. All right, he said as I stepped out. Tell me what happened. I slammed the door shut, gripping the edge of the roof for a second to steady myself. The anger was still there, simmering, but now that I was away from Claire, it felt different, more like exhaustion. I don't want to talk about it yet, I muttered. Ryan studied me for a long moment, then nodded. All right, come in. I followed him upstairs to his apartment. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom, a couch, and a small kitchen. But it was clean. No smell of expensive catered meals. No perfume lingering in the air that wasn't mine. It was better than home. He tossed me a beer from the fridge and dropped onto the couch. You want the guest room or the couch? Guest room. I took a long sip, letting the cold bite of the beer settle in my chest. Ryan nodded, stretching out with a sigh. Guessing this is about Claire? I didn't answer, just took another sip. He whistled low. Damn, that bad. I exhaled slowly. Worse. He didn't push. He just nodded like he understood. You staying here long? I stared at the bottle in my hand. Yeah, maybe. Ryan didn't look surprised. Well, he said, it's your call, man. But whatever she did, you leaving tells me enough. I let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over my jaw. She cheated. Ryan didn't react right away. He just studied me, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he muttered, damn. Yeah, I said, voice hollow. For a while, neither of us spoke. The TV was still on, some late-night sports rerun playing in the background, but I wasn't paying attention. Then Ryan sat up, resting his elbows on his knees. What are you going to do? I let out a slow, humorless chuckle. Divorce her. Ryan nodded. Good. That was it. No false sympathy. No, are you sure? Just agreement. And that was what I needed. Not someone to tell me to work it out. Not someone to convince me to hear her side one more time. I had already heard enough. I leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. My whole life had just changed in a matter of hours. But the weirdest part? I didn't regret walking out. I didn't feel doubt. I didn't feel like I was making the wrong decision. If anything, I felt lighter, like I had just cut off something rotten before it could spread any further. Claire had made her choices. Now, I was making mine. And for the first time in months, I wasn't second-guessing a damn thing.